July 2006. Park Avenue, New York City. In one of the most expensive apartment buildings in the world, an old woman lies on a couch. The room is dark. The air smells stale. The couch is soiled with urine. She is wearing a torn nightgown. Her name is Brooke Astor. She is 104 years old. For decades, she was the Queen of New York. She dined with presidents. She gave away millions of dollars to libraries and museums. When she walked into a room, the city stopped to bow. But now, she is alone. She is hungry. She is terrified. In the next room, her son is managing her money. He is not poor. He is a millionaire many times over. Yet, he has cut her medication budget. He has fired her favorite staff. He has left the most famous woman in high society to rot in her own filth. How does this happen? How does the greatest family dynasty in American history end like this? Most people think money is freedom. They believe that if they had $1 billion, they would be safe. They are wrong. This is not a story about the American dream. It is a story about a nightmare. It is a story about a curse that started 200 years ago. A curse that traveled through bloodlines, sank on the Titanic, and finally destroyed itself from the inside out. To understand the end, we must go back to the beginning. We must go back to a time before the skyscrapers, before the lights, before the name Astor meant anything other than a butcher from a small German village. We are going to tell you the story of the money that built New York and the blood that paid for it. John Jacob Astor did not arrive in America like a king. He arrived like a beggar. The year is 1784. The American Revolution has just ended. The country is young, chaotic, and dangerous. A ship docks in the Baltimore harbor. Down the gangplank walks a 20-year-old German immigrant. He has a heavy accent. He has no connections. He has no real skills. In his pocket, he has 5 pounds sterling. In his luggage, he has 7 wooden flutes. That is it. That is his entire fortune. 7 flutes that he intends to sell. He looks at the muddy streets of the New World. He does not see mud. He sees gold. But he does not know how to extract it yet. On the voyage across the Atlantic, he met a man, a stranger. This stranger told him stories about the American wilderness. He spoke of the native tribes and the vast forests. But mostly, he spoke of the animals, specifically the beaver. In Europe, beaver fur was a status symbol. It was fashion. It was power. In America, the forests were full of them. The stranger told John Jacob that if he could get the furs, he could sell them in London for a massive profit. John Jacob Astor listened. He did not just hear a business idea. He heard a calling. He sells his flutes. He takes the meager cash and heads to New York City. At this time, New York is not a metropolis. It is a small port town clustered at the bottom of Manhattan Island. The rest of the island is farmland, hills, and swamps. He gets a job beating furs for a local dealer. It is dirty work. It involves dust, blood, and the smell of death. Most men hated it. Astor loved it. He studied the texture of every pelt. He learned how to spot a flaw. He learned the market price of every inch of hair. He worked 18 hours a day. He did not drink. He did not socialize. He ate bread and cheese. He saved every single penny. He was not working for a wage. He was gathering ammunition. By 1786, he has enough to start his own shop. But he does not want to be a shopkeeper. He wants to be a king. To do that, he has to go to the source. He puts a pack on his back. He walks into the wilderness of upstate New York. This is not a hike. This is a death zone. There are no roads. There are wolves, bears, and unpredictable weather. Astor does not care. He finds the Iroquois and the Mohawks. He needs their furs, but he does not want to pay fair market value. This is where the darkness begins. Astor realizes that the Native Americans do not value gold coins the way Europeans do. They value utility. They value tools. And, tragically, they value alcohol. He begins to trade cheap trinkets, knives, and liquor for valuable furs. He exploits their lack of knowledge about the London markets. He buys pelts worth hundreds of dollars for the price of a metal pot. He is ruthless. If a competitor tries to enter his territory, he undercuts them until they starve. If a tribe refuses to trade, he finds their enemies and arms them. He builds a network of trading posts that stretches all the way to the Great Lakes. He is a machine. He does not feel empathy. He feels only the weight of the ledger. He writes home to Germany. He tells his brother that he is making money, but he does not tell him the cost. He does not tell him about the whiskey he pours to cloud the minds of his trading partners. He does not tell him about the violence. By 1800, John Jacob Astor is the leading fur trader in the United States. He has $250,000. In today's money, that is millions. Most men would stop. Most men would buy a nice house and retire. Astor is not most men. He looks at his bank account and he feels nothing. It is not enough. It is never enough. He looks east, to China. The China trade is risky. Ships sink. Pirates attack. But if you make it, the profits are astronomical. Astor takes his fur money and bets it all on a ship to Canton. He sends furs and ginseng. He brings back tea, silk, and porcelain. One ship returns. The profit is $50,000. In one single trip, he does it again and again. But then, he discovers something even more profitable than tea: opium. History books often skip this part. They like to paint Astor as a shrewd businessman. They do not like to call him a drug dealer. But for a brief period, John Jacob Astor ships tons of Turkish opium to China. He sells addiction to build his empire. He stops only when the political pressure gets too high. He does not stop because of morality. He stops because it is bad for business. By the time he is 40 years old, he is a giant. But he is a giant standing on shaky ground. The fur trade is volatile. Animals are being hunted to extinction. Ships can be lost in storms. He needs something solid, something that will last forever. He looks down at the ground beneath his feet. He looks at the dirt of Manhattan. The year is 1803. New York City is growing, but everyone is clustered downtown, near the harbor. The land north of the city is considered worthless. It is rocky. It is hilly. It is full of mosquitoes. Astor looks at a map. He sees something no one else sees. He sees the future. He starts buying land. He buys farms. He buys swamps. He buys rocky outcrops that no one wants. People laugh at him. They call him a fool. Why is Astor buying a farm 2 miles north of the city? Who will live there? He buys a piece of land called the Eden Farm. It costs him $25,000. It is a massive tract of land in the middle of nowhere. Today, that nowhere is Times Square. He buys the land underneath the future Empire State Building. He buys the land that will become the New York Public Library. He spends every dollar he earns from furs and tea on dirt. His strategy is simple, and it is cruel. He does not build houses. He is not a developer. He is a landlord. He creates a new kind of lease, the Astor lease. Here is how it works. He leases you a plot of bare land for 21 years. You, the tenant, have to build the house. You have to pay for the bricks, the wood, the labor. You pay him rent for the land every month. You pay the taxes. You do all the work. When the 21 years are up, the lease expires. Does Astor thank you for improving his land? No. The contract states that at the end of the lease, the land and the house you built on it reverts back to him. Unless you want to renew the lease at a much higher price. It is a trap. A beautiful, legal trap. Tenants would build entire neighborhoods, pouring their life savings into the construction. Then, 20 years later, Astor would own it all. He did not plant a single brick. He harvested the city, but he needed more land. And landowners did not always want to sell. So, Astor learned to weaponize the law. He hired the best lawyers in the country. He would scour old property records, looking for mistakes, a missing signature from 50 years ago, a vague boundary line, a lost deed. If he found a mistake, he would sue. He would tie up the landowners in court for years. They could not afford the legal fees. He could. Eventually, they would break. They would sell to him for pennies just to make the lawsuit go away. He was a predator. There is a story about a man who owed Astor a mortgage. The man was struggling. He had a family. He went to Astor's office to beg for more time. Astor sat behind his desk. He looked at the man. He did not yell. He did not get angry. He simply said, "The contract is the contract." He foreclosed on the man. He took the house. This happened hundreds of times. When the panic of 1837 hit, the economy crashed. Banks failed. Businesses closed. People were starving in the streets. Real estate prices plummeted. Everyone was selling. Everyone was desperate. John Jacob Astor was not desperate. He was waiting. He used his cash reserves to buy up Manhattan at fire sale prices. He bought entire blocks for the price of a single house. He doubled his holdings while the rest of the city wept. By 1840, he owns 1/20th of all real estate in New York City. Think about that. One man owned 5% of the most valuable island on Earth. He is now the richest man in America. He is richer than the government. But is he happy? Descriptions of Astor in his old age are terrifying. He is a miserable, lonely figure. He has alienated almost everyone. He is known as the landlord of New York, but it is not a title of respect. It is a title of fear. He lives in a large house, but he lives simply. He checks the account books every day. If he finds a discrepancy of a few cents, he flies into a rage. He has children, but he does not have a legacy of love. He has a legacy of control. His eldest son, John Jacob Astor Jr., is a source of shame. The boy is mentally unstable. In those days, they called it feeble-minded. Today, we might diagnose him with a developmental disability. Astor does not know how to handle a son who cannot make money. He hides the boy away. He builds a small house in the garden, a gilded cage, and locks his son inside. He pays a doctor to watch him. He tries to forget he exists. This is the curse beginning to manifest. The money can buy the land, but it cannot fix the blood. Astor pins all his hopes on his second son, William Backhouse Astor. William is obedient. He is quiet. He is dull. He does exactly what his father tells him to do. The father trains the son. Never sell land, he tells him. Buy, hold, let others build. But father, William might ask, what is the point of it all? The point, the old man would say, is the power. In the final years of his life, John Jacob Astor begins to rot. Literally, his digestive system fails. He cannot eat solid food. The richest man in the world, who could afford any delicacy, is forced to survive on human milk. He employs wet nurses to feed him. His body is failing. His muscles atrophy. He becomes so weak that he cannot exercise. To keep his blood circulating, he has servants toss him in a blanket. They hold the corners of a sheet and throw the old man into the air, catching him, throwing him again. It is a pathetic image. The titan of industry, the butcher of Baden, being tossed like a rag doll in his own living room. He lies on his deathbed in 1848. He calls for his lawyers. There is one final transaction to make, the will. The entire nation is holding its breath. What will he do with the money? He leaves small amounts to his servants, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. He leaves a pittance to the city. He leaves almost nothing to his feeble-minded son. He leaves everything, the land, the bonds, the empire, to William. The sum is staggering, $20 million. To understand how much money that is, you have to adjust for inflation and economic power. In 1848, the average worker earned a few dollars a week. $20 million was roughly 1% of the entire U.S. economy. If a single person owned that percentage of the U.S. economy today, they would be worth $200 billion. John Jacob Astor dies on the 29th of March, 1848. The newspapers write obituaries. They list his accomplishments. They talk about the fur. They talk about the land. But the people of New York speak differently. A minister stands at a pulpit the following Sunday. He does not praise Astor. He uses him as a warning. He has left it all, the minister says. He has taken nothing with him but his sins. The king is dead, but the machine he built is still running. William Backhouse Astor is now the richest man in America. He stands in his father's office. He looks at the maps on the wall. The red lines marking their territory cover half the city. He feels a weight on his shoulders. It is heavy. It is cold. He does not know it yet, but the money is not a gift. It is a job he can never quit. And he has children of his own. The next generation is coming. They will not be content with just owning the land. They will want to rule the society that lives on it. They will want titles. They will want crowns. They will start a war in the ballrooms of Fifth Avenue that will tear the family apart. But before we see the glitz and the glamour of the Gilded Age, we have to understand what William did with the inheritance. He did exactly what his father told him to do. He doubled it. William was called the landlord of New York, just like his father, but he was even more ruthless with the rent. The city was exploding. Immigrants were pouring in from Ireland and Germany. They needed places to live. The Astors owned the land where the tenements were built. The conditions were horrific. Disease, overcrowding, filth. Did William care? He looked at the ledger. The numbers were black. He walked the streets of New York in a dark coat, his head down. He was a miser. He hated spending money. He hated parties. He hated attention. He was a prisoner of his own fortune. One day, a friend asked him, "William, why do you work so hard? You have more money than you could spend in 1,000 lifetimes." William looked at him with tired eyes. "I am not working for myself," he said. "I am working for the estate. I am just the caretaker. The caretaker. That is the tragedy of the Astor family. No one ever really owned the money. The money owned them." As William aged, the empire grew darker. The resentment from the public grew louder. People began to ask, "Why does one family own our city? Why do we pay tribute to them just to exist?" But the Astors were insulated by layers of gold. They built higher walls. They retreated into their mansions. William had two sons, John Jacob Astor III and William Backhouse Astor Jr. These two brothers would not be like their father. They would not be caretakers. They would be rivals. Their wives would hate each other. Their children would compete for the throne. The unity of the first generation was gone. The rot was beginning to set in. And just around the corner, a new century was approaching. A century of speed, steel, and ice. A century that would bring the Astors to the absolute peak of human celebrity, and then drag them to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. But they did not know that yet. They only knew that they were the Astors, and in New York City, that meant they were gods. But even gods can bleed. The money was safe. The real estate was secured. The leases were signed. But for the Astor family, money was no longer enough. When you have more gold than the government, you do not worry about survival. You worry about something else. You worry about relevance. You worry about power. And in the late 19th century, in the gas-lit streets of New York, power did not just mean bank accounts. It meant exclusion. It meant deciding who mattered and who did not. This brings us to the woman who appointed herself the Queen of America. Her name was Caroline Astor, but she did not like that name. She insisted on being called simply the Mrs. Astor. No first name, just the title. As if she were the only Astor woman who existed. She was not a business tycoon. She did not sign leases or hunt for furs. She did something far more terrifying. She controlled the social list. In the 1,870 seconds and 1,880 seconds, New York was flooding with new money. Railroad tycoons, steel barons, oil kings. They arrived in the city with suitcases full of cash, desperate to be accepted. But Caroline Astor stood at the gate, and the gate was locked. She created a system that was as ruthless as her grandfather-in-law's fur trade. It was called the 400. Why 400? The reason was practical, almost comical. That was the exact number of people who could fit into her ballroom at 350 Fifth Avenue. If you were on the list, you were royalty. You were safe. You were an aristocrat. If you were not on the list, you were nobody. It did not matter if you had $10 million. To Mrs. Astor, you were invisible. She held court in her mansion, dripping in diamonds. She wore a stomacher, a giant jewelry piece covered in precious stones that reportedly belonged to French royalty. She stood under crystal chandeliers, judging the souls of New York's elite. This was the Gilded Age. It was a time of extreme surface beauty. Everything was gold. Everything glittered. But underneath, it was a shark tank. And the biggest shark was Mrs. Astor. She had a specific target. She despised the new money families. She called them vulgar. She said they did not have pedigree. The most famous of these rejects was the Vanderbilt family. The Vanderbilts were richer than the Astors. They had built the railroads that connected America. They had money to burn. But Mrs. Astor refused to acknowledge them. Alva Vanderbilt, a woman just as stubborn as Caroline, decided she had had enough. Alva built a mansion that made the Astor home look like a cottage. She planned a costume ball that would be the party of the century. Everyone wanted to go. Even Caroline Astor's own daughter, Carrie. Carrie Astor practiced her dance moves. She got her costume ready. She was excited, but then the trap snapped shut. Alva Vanderbilt announced that Carrie Astor could not attend. Why? Because Mrs. Astor had never formally visited the Vanderbilt home. Since the families had never met, Alva could not possibly invite the daughter. It was a masterstroke of social blackmail. Caroline Astor had a choice. She could hold onto her pride and break her daughter's heart, or she could surrender. The Queen of New York ordered her carriage. She rode to the Vanderbilt mansion. She walked up the steps. She left her calling card on a silver tray. It was a total surrender. The Vanderbilts were in. The list expanded. The gate was forced open. But this was not the only war Caroline was fighting. The most bitter battle was not with the neighbors. It was inside the house. It was the War of the Roses. The Astor family had split into two main branches. On one side was Caroline and her husband. On the other side was her nephew, William Waldorf Astor. William was a strange man. He was prickly. He was easily offended, and he hated his Aunt Caroline. He hated that she called herself the Mrs. Astor. He felt that his wife should hold that title. He hated her parties. He hated her influence. But mostly, he hated living next door to her. Their mansions were side by side on Fifth Avenue. He could see her guests arriving. He could hear the music. It drove him mad. So, William Waldorf Astor decided to do something that only a billionaire can do. He decided to ruin her life with architecture. He moved out of his mansion. He tore it down. And in its place, he did not build a park. He did not build a library. He built a hotel. But not just any hotel. He built the Waldorf Hotel. It was massive. It was loud. It was bustling. He designed it specifically to overshadow Caroline's house. He wanted crowds of strangers, tourists, and businessmen swarming the sidewalk right next to her front door. He wanted to block her sunlight. He wanted to destroy the peace of her exclusive little world. It was an act of pure, expensive spite. Caroline was furious. Her sanctuary was gone. The quiet elegance of her corner was replaced by the chaos of a luxury hotel. She held out for a while, closing her curtains, ignoring the noise. But eventually, she broke. She moved uptown, further north, to escape the shadow of her nephew's revenge. And what did her son, John Jacob Astor IV, do with the empty house she left behind? He tore it down, and he built another hotel right next to his cousin's. He named it the Astoria. Eventually, the cousins realized that fighting was bad for business. They connected the two buildings with a long corridor. The result was the Waldorf Astoria. Today, we look at that name as a symbol of elegance. We see it on towels and bathrobes. But we do not see the truth. That hotel stands as a monument to a family feud. It exists because a nephew hated his aunt so much that he tried to block out her son. William Waldorf Astor was so disgusted by America and by his family that he eventually left the country entirely. He moved to England. He bought a castle. He tried to become a British lord. He faked his own death once, just to see what the newspapers would say about him. He was done with New York. This left the American throne empty. The crown passed to Caroline's son. His name was John Jacob Astor IV, Jack. If the first John Jacob Astor was a ruthless predator, and the second was a boring accountant, Jack was something else entirely. He was the American aristocracy personified. He was tall, he was handsome, he was incredibly rich. By the early 1900s, His personal fortune was estimated at $87 million. In today's money, that is well over $2 billion. But Jack was not just a rich kid. He was an oddball. He was an inventor. He patented a bicycle brake. He invented a vibratory disintegrator, a machine used to produce gas from peat moss. He designed a pneumatic road cleaner. He even wrote science fiction. In 1894, he published a novel called Time's a Journey in Other Worlds, Astors. It was a story about life in the year 2000. In his book, he predicted video phones. He predicted global telephone networks. He predicted solar power. He was a futurist. He looked at the world and saw possibilities. But there was one thing he could not invent. He could not invent a way to escape the stiff, suffocating rules of his own family. Jack followed the script for a long time. He married the right woman, Ava Willing. She was beautiful, cold, and socially perfect. They had 2 children. They hosted the balls. They ruled society. But Jack was miserable, and Ava was miserable. In 1909, they did the unthinkable. They got divorced. Today, a billionaire getting divorced is a Tuesday. In 1909, it was a nuclear explosion. The Astors did not get divorced. They stayed married, they suffered, and they kept up appearances. Jack broke the rule, but he did not stop there. He was about to light a match and throw it into the powder keg of New York society. He fell in love. Her name was Madeline Force. She was young, she was vibrant, she was everything his ex-wife was not. There was just one problem. One very large problem. Jack was 47 years old. Madeline was 18. He was older than her father. The press went berserk. They called him an old lecher. They called her a gold digger. The pulpit preachers gave sermons about his lust. The society ladies, the very women his mother had ruled over, turned their backs on him. They refused to invite the couple to parties. When Jack and Madeline walked into a room, people walked out. The King of New York had become a social leper. It was humiliating. Jack had the money, but he had lost the respect. The couple decided they could not stay in America. The heat was too intense. They did what rich people do when they are in trouble. They went to Europe. They traveled to Egypt. They went to Paris. They spent months buying art, dining in palaces, trying to forget that their hometown hated them. They were happy. For a brief moment, they were just a husband and wife, away from the glare of the Astor name. But biology has a way of changing plans. In the spring of 1912, Madeline made an announcement. She was pregnant. Jack was overjoyed. He wanted this child to be born in the United States. He wanted the next Astor heir to be an American. They needed to go home. They traveled to Cherbourg, France. They had a mountain of luggage. They had their servants. They had their dog, Kitty. They needed a ship that was fast, comfortable, and safe. A ship worthy of the richest man in the world. Luckily, the White Star Line had just launched something special. It was the largest moving object ever built by human hands. A floating palace of steel and rivets. It was declared unsinkable. It was the RMS Titanic. Jack and Madeline boarded the ship on the evening of the 10th of April, 1912. They occupied the finest suite on the vessel. It had a private promenade deck. It cost $4,000 for the one-way trip. In today's currency, that is roughly $100,000. For Jack, it was pocket change. The first few days were perfect. The sea was glass. The food was excellent. They walked their dog on the deck. Jack likely visited the gymnasium, marveling at the mechanical camels and rowing machines. He loved gadgets, and the Titanic was the ultimate gadget. He felt safe. Why would he not? He was John Jacob Astor. The world bent to his will. Steel and iron did what he paid them to do. But on the night of April 14, at 11:40 p.m., the universe stopped bending. A deep vibration shuddered through the ship. It was not a violent crash. It was a scrape, a grinding noise. Jack was in the smoking room. He felt the jar. He did not panic. Men like him did not panic. He investigated. He found out the ship had hit an iceberg. Witnesses say he was incredibly calm. He returned to the suite to wake up Madeline. He told her to put on her life belt. But he told her not to worry. He reportedly said, "We are safer here than in that little boat." He believed it. He had faith in the engineering. He had faith in the size of the ship. But as the bow began to dip and the water began to rise, the reality set in. The slant of the deck became steep. The calm night turned into chaos. The lifeboats were being lowered. Jack guided Madeline to Lifeboat 4. She was young, pregnant, and terrified. She did not want to leave him. He helped her over the rail. He asked the officer in charge if he could join her to protect her delicate condition. The officer looked at the richest man in the world, the man who owned 20 hotels, the man whose grandfather bought Manhattan, and the officer said, "No, women and children only." Jack did not argue. He did not try to bribe the man. He did not use his name. He simply stepped back. He tossed his gloves to Madeline. He blew her a kiss. He turned away and walked into the crowd. The last time anyone saw John Jacob Astor IV alive, he was standing on the deck, smoking a cigarette with an American mystery writer named Jacques Futrelle. They watched the lifeboats row away into the dark. Imagine that moment. You are the fourth generation of the greatest dynasty in America. You have everything a human being can possess. You have power, fame, genius, and a fortune that is almost impossible to comprehend. And none of it matters. The freezing Atlantic water does not care about your bank account. The iceberg does not care about your pedigree. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic broke apart and slipped beneath the surface. 1,500 people went into the water. John Jacob Astor was one of them. Survivors in the boats heard the sound. They said it sounded like a swarm of bees. It was the sound of hundreds of people screaming for help. Then, slowly, the silence returned. Days later, a recovery ship, the Mackay Bennett, was scanning the water for bodies. They found a man floating in a lifebelt. His face was crushed, likely by a falling smokestack, but his clothes were immaculate. They checked the collar of his jacket. The initials J, J, A were sewn into the fabric. They searched his pockets. They found a gold watch. They found diamond cufflinks. They found a gold pencil. And they found $2,440 in cash. That is roughly $70,000 in cash, just sitting in a wet pocket. It was enough money to buy a house, enough to feed a family for a decade. But in the middle of the North Atlantic, it could not buy him one more breath of air. The body was brought back to New York. The funeral was a massive event. The king was dead, but the story was not over. Madeline survived. She returned to the mansion that Jack had built. She was a widow at 19. 4 months after the sinking, she gave birth to a baby boy. She named him John Jacob Astor VI. The press called him the Titanic baby. He was the heir to the throne. He was born with the weight of a tragedy on his shoulders. He never met his father. He only knew the legend. And this is where the curse begins to twist. You might think that surviving the Titanic would bring the family closer together. You might think that the sudden death of the patriarch would teach them the value of love and unity. You would be wrong. The death of John Jacob Astor IV left a vacuum, a massive, power-hungry hole in the center of the empire, and nature abhors a vacuum. The fortune was about to be split. The leadership was about to be tested. And the next generation of Astors, the ones who did not build the fortune, but simply waited for it, were about to prove that getting money is hard, but keeping it is much harder. The Gilded Age was over. The modern world had arrived, and it was ugly. The Titanic took Jack down. But what came next would take the whole family down. Because while an iceberg can kill a man, only greed can kill a dynasty. The ship had sunk, but the real wreckage was yet to come. The ice of the North Atlantic had claimed the King of New York. John Jacob Astor IV was gone. His body was recovered, his pockets filled with wet diamonds and soaked cash, but the man himself was cold and dead. The world expected the Astor dynasty to die with him. They were wrong. The money did not die. The buildings did not sink. The leases did not expire. The machine that the first John Jacob Astor built was too big to fail. It just needed a new driver. Enter Vincent Astor. He was only 20 years old. He was a college dropout. He was awkward, shy, and looked nothing like a titan of industry. Yet, overnight, he became the richest young man in America. He inherited an estimated $87 million, adjusted for inflation. That is well over $2 billion today. But Vincent was different from his father. He was different from his grandfather. He looked at his family legacy, and he did not see glory. He saw dirt. For 100 years, the Astors had been the slumlords of New York. They owned the rotting tenements where immigrants coughed their lungs out. They owned the land under the brothels and the gambling dens. They collected rent from the poorest people in the city to fund their ballroom dances. Vincent hated it. He made a decision that shocked high society. He decided to clean the money. He sold the slums. He sold the filthy real estate. He started to reinvest in respectable properties. He wanted the name Astor to mean something other than greed. He wanted it to mean dignity. He built the Street Regis. He courted politicians. He became a friend to Franklin D. Roosevelt. While other rich families hoarded their gold during the Great Depression, Vincent tried to be a patriot. But there was a problem. When you stop being a ruthless predator, you stop making ruthless profits. The Astor fortune began to do something it had never done before. It stopped growing. For the first time in a century, the pile of gold was stagnant. It was still massive, yes, but it was not alive. It was a museum piece, a relic of a bygone era. Vincent spent his life trying to be a good, rich man. He married, he divorced, he married again. He had no children. The bloodline was thinning out. The fire was gone. By the late 1952, Vincent was an old man. He was tired. He was lonely. He sat in his massive estates, surrounded by servants, with no heir to take the throne. The dynasty was facing an existential crisis. If Vincent died without a plan, the government would take it all in taxes. The Astor name would vanish into the archives of history. He needed a partner. He needed someone who could carry the torch. He found her at a dinner party. Her name was Brooke. She was not an heiress. She was not royalty. She was the daughter of a Marine Corps officer. She had been married twice before. She was 51 years old. She was sharp. She was elegant. And she was tough. Vincent fell in love. But more importantly, he found a successor. He married Brooke in 1953. He told her, "Brooke, you are going to have a hell of a lot of fun with this money." He did not know how right he was. 5 years later, Vincent Astor died of a heart attack. The lawyers gathered in the library. The will was read, and the shockwave hit New York City like a bomb. Vincent did not leave his money to his distant cousins. He did not leave it to his business partners. He left almost everything to the Vincent Astor Foundation, and he left Brooke in charge of the foundation. Overnight, Brooke Astor became the gatekeeper of $60 million. She could have hoarded it. She could have spent it on yachts and islands. She could have done what every other Astor wife had done for 100 years. Wear the diamonds and ignore the poor. But Brooke had a different philosophy. She had a saying that would become famous. Money is like manure. It is not worth a thing unless it is spread around, encouraging young things to grow. And spread it she did. Brooke Astor did not just write checks. She went to the front lines. She put on her Chanel suit, her pearls, and her white gloves, and she walked into the toughest neighborhoods in New York. She went to Harlem. She went to the Bronx. She walked past burning trash cans and graffiti-covered walls. She inspected community centers. She looked at broken libraries. She visited homeless shelters. When she saw a problem, she fixed it. Does the library need a new roof? Done. Does the park need new lights? Done. Does the museum need a new wing? She gave away millions. Then she gave away 10 million more. Then 20 million more. She became the soul of New York City. The press loved her. The politicians feared her. The people adored her. She was the First Lady of New York. She was proof that money could be good. She redeemed the Astor name. She washed away the sins of the Butcher of Baden. It was a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has a villain. And usually, the villain is closer than you think. While Brooke was busy saving the city, there was someone watching her from the shadows. Someone who was counting every dollar she gave away. Someone who looked at those charitable donations and saw his own inheritance disappearing. His name was Anthony Marshall. He was Brooke's son. Not Vincent's son, he was from her first marriage. Anthony was a man who seemed successful on paper. He had been a Marine. He had worked for the CIA. He had been an ambassador. He had a chest full of medals and a wall full of diplomas. But inside, he was a hollow man. He had spent his entire life waiting for approval, waiting for attention, and most of all, waiting for the money. He was the spare in a world of kings. He watched his mother become a global icon. He watched her dine with presidents and queens. He watched her receive applause wherever she went, and he stood 2 steps behind her, holding her coat. Anthony was not a young man anymore. By the 1,990 seconds, he was in his 70s. Most men his age were retired, but Anthony was still working for his mother. He managed her finances. He handled her schedule. He was her gatekeeper. But he was not rich. Not Astor rich. He lived well, but he wanted more. He saw the millions flowing out of the foundation to charities, and it made him sick. Every million given to the New York Public Library was a million that would not go into his pocket. Greed is a slow poison. It does not kill you instantly. It rots you from the inside out. For decades, Anthony played the part of the dutiful son. He smiled for the cameras. He escorted his mother to the galas. He kissed her on the cheek. But behind the scenes, the tension was building. Anthony needed money. He had expensive tastes. He had a younger wife, Charlene, who liked the finer things in life. He wanted to be a player on the world stage. But his mother held the purse strings, and she was not dying. Brooke Astor was blessed with incredible longevity. She lived into her 80s, then her 90s. She was 100 years old and still going to parties. She was unstoppable. For the city of New York, this was a miracle. For Anthony Marshall, it was a nightmare. He was an old man, waiting for an even older woman to die. He was 75, then 80. He was running out of time to enjoy the fortune he felt he deserved. Then, nature finally began to take its course. It started slowly. A forgotten name here, a misplaced item there. The sharp, brilliant mind of Brooke Astor began to fog. Alzheimer's disease is cruel. It strips away a person's identity layer by layer. For Brooke, it was a slow retreat from the world she loved. She stopped going to galas. She stopped visiting the libraries. She retreated into her apartment on Park Avenue. This was the moment Anthony had been waiting for. As Brooke's mind faded, Anthony's control grew. He became her legal guardian. He took power of attorney. He was now the absolute master of her world. And he began to make changes. He looked at her expenses. He decided she was spending too much money, not on herself, but on her life. He fired her favorite staff members. The butler who had served her for years, gone. The maid who knew exactly how she liked her tea, fired. He replaced them with cheaper, temporary workers who did not know her and did not care about her. He cut her household budget. He reduced the amount spent on food. He reduced the amount spent on flowers. He even cut the budget for her medication. Why? Because every dollar he saved from her care was a dollar that stayed in the estate, and the estate would eventually be his. It was a cold, calculated brutality. Imagine this scene. You are Brooke Astor. You are the woman who gave away nearly $200 million to make New York beautiful. You have dined with royalty. You have been the toast of the town. Now, you are 102 years old. You are confused. You are frightened. You are sitting on a soiled couch in a torn nightgown. The apartment is cold. The staff ignores you. Your own son walks into the room, checks his watch, and walks out without saying a word. You are the richest woman in New York, and you are living in squalor. Anthony Marshall did not just neglect her. He isolated her. He blocked her friends from visiting. He told people she was too sick to see anyone. He told them she was asleep. He told them she did not want to be disturbed. He built a wall around her, a wall of silence. Inside that wall, he went to work. He brought in lawyers. He brought in documents. Brooke could barely see. She could barely understand what day it was. But Anthony guided her hand. Sign here, mother. Just one more signature, Mother. This is for your own good, Mother. He made her sign codicil after codicil. A codicil is an amendment to a will. With each signature, he changed the destiny of the Astor fortune. He diverted millions of dollars away from the charities she loved. He diverted millions away from the foundation. And he directed it all straight to himself. He gave himself a raise. He used her money to pay for his theater productions. He used her money to pay for his captain's salary. He was draining the accounts while she sat in the next room, staring at the wall. It was the perfect crime. Who would question him? He was her son. He was her guardian. And she was too far gone to complain, or so he thought. Anthony made one critical mistake. He forgot that the help sees everything. He treated the staff like furniture. He assumed they were too powerless to do anything. He assumed they would just take their paychecks and keep their mouths shut. But the staff loved Brooke. They remembered who she was before the fog set in. They remembered her kindness. They remembered her dignity. And they saw what was happening. They saw the bruises. They saw the fear in her eyes when Anthony walked into the room. They saw the food she was forced to eat, pureed mush that looked like prison slop. They saw her sleeping on a couch that smelled of urine because Anthony refused to pay for proper cleaning. They whispered in the kitchen. They gathered in the pantry. They knew that if they spoke up, they would be fired. They would lose their livelihoods. They would be crushed by a man with millions of dollars and powerful lawyers. But they could not stay silent. One of the butlers made a call. Not to the police, but to someone who could fight back. He called Philip Marshall. Philip was Anthony's son, Brooke's grandson. Philip was a professor. He was not interested in the money. He lived a quiet life. He had not seen his grandmother in a long time because his father, Anthony, had blocked him from visiting. When the butler told Philip what was happening inside the apartment on Park Avenue, Philip did not believe it at first. It sounded impossible. This was Brooke Astor. She was American royalty. But the butler insisted. "Mr. Philip, you have to come. She is dying, and he is killing her." Philip had a choice. He could stay out of it. He could let nature take its course. He knew that if he challenged his father, he would be cut out of the will completely. He would lose any chance of inheriting a dime. He would be declaring war on his own blood. Philip did not hesitate. He filed a petition in court. He accused his father of elder abuse. He accused his father of stealing millions. He demanded that Anthony be removed as guardian immediately. The moment those papers were filed, the secret was out. The untold story was about to be told on the front page of every newspaper in the world. The gates of the apartment were thrown open. The curtain was pulled back. The tabloids went wild. Disaster for the Astors. Brooke's tragedy. The police commissioner sent detectives. Social services arrived. They walked into the apartment that was supposed to be a palace, and they found a prison. They found the torn curtains. They found the soiled couch. They found the Queen of New York, fragile and confused, asking where her husband was. It was a scandal that eclipsed everything. The Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, none of them had an ending this tragic. But this was not just a family squabble. This was a criminal case. The district attorney looked at the signatures. He looked at the bank transfers. He looked at the timeline of Brooke's dementia and the timeline of Anthony's raises. He saw a pattern. He saw theft. He saw fraud. He saw a man who had waited so long for his inheritance that he decided to take it before the owner was dead. Anthony Marshall was indicted. The charge was grand larceny, conspiracy, possessing a forged instrument. The son of the most beloved woman in New York was arrested. He was fingerprinted. He was treated like a common thief. He denied everything. He claimed he loved his mother. He claimed everything he did was what she wanted. He claimed the staff was lying. He claimed his son Philip was just jealous. But the evidence was piling up, and so the stage was set for the final act of the Astor dynasty. It would not be a ballroom dance. It would not be a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It would be a criminal trial. A jury of regular New Yorkers, people who walked past the libraries Brooke built, people who sat in the parks she funded, would decide the fate of her son. The man who wanted everything was about to risk losing it all. He had gambled his reputation, his family, and his freedom on one simple belief, that the money belonged to him. But as he sat in the defendant's chair, watching the prosecutors stack boxes of evidence against him, Anthony Marshall was about to learn a lesson that his great-great-grandfather, the Butcher of Baden, never understood. You can own the land, you can own the buildings, you can own the law, but you cannot buy your way out of the truth. The trial of the century was about to begin, and the ghost of Brooke Astor, though she was still breathing, was the star witness. The year was 2006. Inside the limestone walls of the most exclusive apartment building in New York City, a tragedy was unfolding. It was not a tragedy of poverty. It was a tragedy of absolute, unchecked greed. Brooke Astor was 104 years old. She was the queen of New York society. She had given away nearly $200 million to libraries, museums, and homeless shelters. She was the woman who put on her best diamonds to visit the slums because she believed the poor deserved to see something beautiful. But inside her duplex at 778 Park Avenue, the diamonds were gone. The woman who had hosted presidents and royalty was now living in squalor. This is where the story turns dark. This is where the golden age of the Astors finally rots from the inside out. Anthony Marshall, her only son, was in charge. He held the power of attorney. He controlled the money. He controlled the doctors. He controlled who could visit and who could not. And Anthony was angry. For 50 years, he had waited. He had watched his mother spend the family fortune on charity. He had watched her receive the applause, the awards, and the love of the city. He felt he was owed. He was 81 years old. He was tired of waiting for his inheritance. So, he decided to take it while she was still alive. But he did not just steal the money. That would have been simple. That would have been a white-collar crime. What Anthony Marshall did was far more personal. He began to cut costs. He looked at his mother, a woman worth over $100 million, and he decided she was costing him too much money. He fired her beloved butler. He fired the chef who prepared the only soft foods she could eat. He cut back on her medication. The apartment, once the crown jewel of Park Avenue, fell into disrepair. The drapes were torn, the carpets were stained, the paint was peeling, but the physical neglect was nothing compared to the emotional isolation. Anthony ordered the staff not to speak to her. He restricted her visitors. He isolated her in the library, a room she once loved, which had now become her prison. The First Lady of New York was sleeping on a couch that smelled of urine. She was wearing a torn nightgown. Her hair was unwashed. When her friends tried to visit, Anthony told them she was too sick. When her doctors suggested treatments, Anthony said they were too expensive. He was a millionaire counting pennies while his mother suffered in the next room. Why? Why would a man with access to such immense wealth inflict this kind of cruelty on his own mother? The answer is terrifyingly simple. It was not about the money he had. It was about the money he thought he was losing. Every dollar spent on a nurse was a dollar that would not go into his pocket when she died. Every dollar spent on fresh flowers was a dollar lost from his future. He had become his great-great-grandfather, the Butcher of Baden. He saw everything as a transaction, even his mother's comfort. But Anthony Marshall made one critical mistake. He forgot that servants have eyes. He treated the staff as if they were furniture. He did not think they had voices. He did not think they had power. He was wrong. The staff loved Brooke Astor. They had served her for decades. They remembered her kindness. They remembered how she treated them with respect. Unlike her son, they began to keep a diary. Every time Anthony screamed at his mother, they wrote it down. Every time he refused to call a doctor, they wrote it down. Every time he forced her to sign a document she did not understand, they wrote it down. They were building a case, but they needed someone to listen. Enter Philip Marshall. Philip was Anthony's son, Brooke's grandson. He was a professor. He was not interested in the high society games. He was not interested in the money. He just loved his grandmother. When Philip visited the apartment in the summer of 2006, he was horrified. He saw the stains on the couch. He saw the fear in his grandmother's eyes. He saw the way she looked at his father, not with love, but with terror. He pulled the staff aside. They showed him the diary. Philip Marshall faced a choice. If he spoke up, He would be cut out of the will. He would lose millions of dollars. He would be publicly attacking his own father. He would destroy the family reputation that had stood for 2 centuries. Most people would have stayed silent. Most people would have taken the money. Philip Marshall did not. In July of 2006, Philip filed a petition in the New York Supreme Court. He asked the court to remove his father as Brooke's guardian. He accused his father of elder abuse and fraud. He did not do it for the inheritance. He did it to save a 104-year-old woman from her own son. The news hit New York like a nuclear bomb. "Disaster at the Astors!" screamed the headlines. The tabloids went into a frenzy. The Daily News, the New York Post, they had a field day. The richest woman in the city was living in a slum of her son's making. The court appointed a temporary guardian. They sent an evaluator to the apartment. What the evaluator found confirmed everything. Brooke Astor was immediately moved to her country estate, Holly Hill. She was given proper medical care. She was given fresh clothes. She was surrounded by flowers and music. For the last year of her life, Brooke Astor was free. She died in 2007 at the age of 105. But for Anthony Marshall, the nightmare was just beginning. The district attorney of Manhattan looked at the evidence. They looked at the bank transfers. They looked at the unauthorized raises Anthony had given himself. They looked at the codicils, the amendments to the will that Brooke had signed when she was clearly suffering from Alzheimer's. In one instance, Anthony had brought a lawyer to his mother while she was eating lunch. He told her to sign a paper. She asked what it was. He told her it was to help the staff. She signed it. It was a document that transferred millions of dollars of her estate directly to him. The district attorney did not see this as a family dispute. They saw it as grand larceny. They indicted Anthony Marshall. The trial began in March of 2009. It was dubbed the trial of the century for New York high society, and it lived up to the name. The witness list read like a who's who of the global elite. Henry Kissinger took the stand. Barbara Walters took the stand. Graydon Carter, the editor of Vanity Fair, took the stand. They all testified to the same thing. Brooke Astor's mental state had been deteriorating for years. She did not know who she was. She did not know who they were. Henry Kissinger described a dinner party where Brooke, the ultimate hostess, tried to introduce guests to people who were not there. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman who was helpless, confused, and terrified. And then, they pointed the finger at the man sitting at the defense table. Anthony Marshall was 85 years old. He looked frail. He walked with a cane. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a grandfather. But the prosecution was relentless. They showed the jury the numbers. They showed how Anthony had used his mother's money to pay for his own theater productions. They showed how he had used her money to buy a yacht captain's uniform. They showed how he had transferred her favorite paintings to his own walls. It was petty. It was greedy. It was pathetic. The defense tried to argue that Brooke loved her son. They argued that she times wanted times him to have the money. They argued that she was lucid when she signed the documents. She was a lady who knew what she wanted, his lawyer argued, and she wanted to take care of her boy. But the jury had to listen to the testimony of the staff. The maids described how Anthony ordered them to buy cheaper dog food for Brooke's beloved dachshunds, Boise and Girlsey. Think about that for a second. This is a family worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and the son is trying to save 50 cents on a can of dog food. It was a detail that stuck. It was a detail that revealed the true character of the man. It was not about necessity. It was about control. The trial lasted for 19 weeks. The jury deliberated for 12 days. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. This was the final chapter of the Astor dynasty. The family that had built New York, the family that had defined American aristocracy, was ending not with a grand ball, but with a criminal verdict. On October 8, 2009, the jury returned. Anthony Marshall stood up. His hands trembled on his cane. Guilty. The word rang out. Guilty of grand larceny. Guilty of scheming to defraud. Guilty of possessing stolen property. He was convicted of stealing millions from his own mother. The sentence was 1 to 3 years in prison. Anthony Marshall was 85 years old. A prison sentence was effectively a death sentence. He appealed, of course. He fought it for years. But in June of 2013, at the age of 89, the son of the Astor fortune reported to prison. He arrived in a wheelchair. He was assigned to a handicap-accessible unit. The man who had been born into the highest echelons of wealth, the man who had walked the decks of yachts and the halls of palaces, was now inmate number 13R2092. He served only 8 weeks before being granted medical parole. He died a year later, disgraced and disowned by the city his family had ruled. But the verdict did more than just punish a greedy son. It shattered the illusion of the Astor dynasty. For 200 years, the Astors had projected an image of untouchable power. They were the landlords. They were the socialites. They were the philanthropists. But the trial pulled back the curtain. It revealed that beneath the gold and the glamour, there was rot. It revealed that the immense wealth John Jacob Astor I had accumulated by swindling fur trappers and cheating Native Americans had not brought happiness to his descendants. It had brought suspicion. It had brought isolation. It had brought a greed so consuming that a son would let his mother sit in her own filth just to save a few dollars. The money was supposed to be a blessing. It became a curse. Brooke Astor had tried to break that curse. She had tried to give the money away. She had tried to use it for good. She understood something that none of the Astor men ever did. Money is like manure. It is only good if you spread it around. If you pile it up in one place, it stinks. Anthony Marshall tried to pile it up, and the stench destroyed him. With Anthony's conviction, the Astor estate was finally settled. Millions were returned to charity. The schools, the museums, the parks, they received the funds that Brooke had intended for them. Philip Marshall, the whistleblower, received a settlement of $10 million, but he gave most of it away. He kept his job as a professor. He lived a quiet life. He broke the cycle. He was the only Astor who walked away with his soul intact. But what about the legacy? Walk through New York City today. You will see the name Astor everywhere. Astor Place, the Waldorf Astoria, the Astor Library, the Astor Court at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The buildings are magnificent. The stone is solid. The history is written in iron and glass. But the family, the bloodline, it is scattered. It is broken. It is gone. The trial of Anthony Marshall was the final nail in the coffin. It was the moment the American aristocracy officially died. There are no more Mrs. Astors ruling the ballroom. There are no more robber barons buying entire neighborhoods. The era of the Astor supremacy is over. But there is one final question we have to answer. We have seen the rise. We have seen the greed. We have seen the Titanic. We have seen the fall. But was it worth it? John Jacob Astor. I spent his entire life accumulating wealth. He sacrificed his health, his reputation, and his humanity to build a mountain of gold. He did it for his family. He did it to create a dynasty that would last forever. He wanted his name to be immortal. Well, he succeeded. His name is immortal. But if he could see how it ended with his great-great-grandson going to prison for stealing from a senile woman, would he have stayed in Germany? Would he have been happier making flutes? We often look at billionaires today, the Musks, the Bezos, the Zuckerbergs, and we feel a sense of envy. We imagine their lives are perfect. We imagine that amount of money buys freedom. The story of the Astors proves the opposite. Absolute wealth is not freedom. It is a cage. It traps you in a world where you cannot trust anyone. Not your friends, not your spouse, not even your own children. It creates a reality where love is suspect and loyalty is bought. John Jacob Astor built a cage of gold, and for 200 years, his family beat their wings against the bars until they finally stopped moving. The buildings remain, the money remains, but the people, they were consumed by the very thing they thought would save them. In the end, the Astor fortune did not belong to the Astors. The Astors belonged to the fortune. It owned them, and it demanded a heavy price. When Brooke Astor died, her tombstone was inscribed with a simple epitaph. It did not list her wealth. It did not list her titles. It reads, "I had a wonderful life." And perhaps she did. She was the only one who learned the secret. She gave it away. She found joy not in holding the gold, but in letting it go. While her son grasped for every penny and lost everything, she opened her hands and gained the heart of a city. There is a lesson there, a lesson that costs nothing, but is worth more than all the real estate in Manhattan. The legacy you leave is not what you build for yourself. It is what you give to others. The Astors are gone. Their palaces have been turned into condos. Their ballrooms are silent, but walk past the New York Public Library. Look at the lions. Look at the people reading, learning, growing. That is the only part of the Astor Empire that truly matters. The rest is just dust and greed. So, the next time you walk down Fifth Avenue, or you see a name carved into the stone of a great building, remember the Butcher of Baden. Remember the Titanic. Remember the soiled couch. Remember that empires rise and empires fall. But the truth always survives the crash. But inside the walls of 778 Park Avenue, the lights were going out. To the outside world, Brooke Astor was still the Queen of New York. She was 100 years old. She was an icon. When people saw her in the newspapers, she looked elegant. She looked loved. But that was a lie. If you walked into her apartment in those final years, you would not smell fresh flowers or expensive perfume. You would smell dog urine. You would not see a team of nurses attending to the most generous woman in the city. You would see a woman sleeping on a couch that was stained and soiled. You would see the First Lady of New York wearing a torn nightgown. This is the part of the story that makes people look away. It is uncomfortable. It is ugly. But you must look, because this is where the curse of the Astor fortune finally reveals its true face. It was not a ghost. It was not a bad investment. It was a son. Anthony Marshall was 80 years old. He had spent his entire life waiting. He waited for his mother's attention. He waited for her approval. But mostly, he waited for her money. And he was tired of waiting. Brooke Astor was living too long. Every year she stayed alive was another year she gave away millions of dollars to charity. That was money Anthony believed belonged to him. It was his inheritance. And he watched it drain away, check by check, into the libraries and museums of New York. So, he decided to stop the bleeding. He took control of her medical care. He took control of her household. And he began to cut costs. But he did not just trim the fat. He cut into the bone. He fired her beloved butler. He fired the staff who had known her for decades. He replaced them with fewer, cheaper workers who did not know her routine. He reduced the budget for her medication. Brooke Astor, a woman worth nearly $200 million, was suddenly living in squalor. Her son, who was paying himself a salary of $2 million a year to manage her affairs, would not pay for a new couch. When her lipstick ran out, the staff was told not to buy more. They were told to use Vaseline. When she wanted to go to her country estate, the place she loved more than anything, Anthony said no. He said it was too expensive to open the house. He shut down the heat in parts of the apartment to save on electric bills. The woman who had given New York its soul was freezing in her own living room. Why? The answer is darker than simple greed. It was resentment. It was a punishment. Anthony Marshall was not just stealing from his mother. He was erasing her. He was stripping away her dignity, layer by layer, until there was nothing left but a confused, frightened old woman. But Anthony made a mistake. He forgot that even in the dark, people are watching. The staff he had not fired yet were horrified. They saw the bruises. They saw the depression. They saw the richest woman in New York eating pureed food that looked like sludge. They began to keep a diary. They wrote down the insults. They wrote down the neglect. They wrote down the dates and the times. And then they found a lifeline. Philip Marshall. Philip was Anthony's son. He was Brooke's grandson. He was a professor. He was not part of the high society glitter. He lived a quiet life, but he loved his grandmother. When Philip visited 778 Park Avenue, he felt sick. He saw the decline. He saw his father's cold indifference. He faced a choice. It is the kind of choice that tears families apart forever. He could stay silent. He could protect the family name. He could wait for his own inheritance. That is what an Astor would usually do. Keep the scandal behind closed doors. Or he could burn it all down to save her. Philip chose the fire. In July of 2006, Philip Marshall filed a petition in the New York State Supreme Court. He accused his own father of abusing his grandmother. He accused him of neglecting her care and looting her estate. The news hit New York like a bomb. The headlines were vicious. Disaster for Mars, Astor. The grandson vs. the son. The veil was lifted. The secrecy that John Jacob Astor I had established 200 years ago was gone. The private misery of the Astor dynasty was now public entertainment. The court acted fast. They removed Anthony Marshall from control. They appointed a new guardian. Brooke Astor was taken to her country home. She was given fresh flowers. She was given proper medical care. She was surrounded by people who did not want her money, but who simply wanted her to be comfortable. She lived for one more year. On the 13th of August 2007, Brooke Astor died. She was 105 years old. Her funeral was a state event. The traffic on Fifth Avenue stopped. The bells rang. The city mourned the woman who had loved it so much, but as the casket was lowered into the ground, the eyes of the city turned to Anthony Marshall. He stood there, leaning on a cane. He looked frail. He looked sad. But the law does not care if you are sad. The law only cares about what you did. The death of Brooke Astor was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the reckoning. The district attorney of Manhattan had been looking at the diaries. They had been looking at the bank accounts. They had been looking at the wills that Anthony had convinced his confused mother to sign in her final years. These new wills gave Anthony millions of dollars that were supposed to go to charity. They gave him control of the estate. The prosecutors did not see a grieving son. They saw a thief. In November 2007, a few months after his mother died, Anthony Marshall was indicted. The charges were severe: grand larceny, conspiracy, possession of stolen property. The trial began in March 2009. It was called the Trial of the Century for New York high society, and it was a circus. Imagine the scene: a Manhattan courtroom packed with reporters, sketch artists sharpening their pencils, and on the witness stand, the most famous people in the world. Barbara Walters testified. Henry Kissinger testified. They spoke of Brooke's elegance. They spoke of her confusion in later years. The jury listened to stories about how Anthony tricked his mother into signing papers she did not understand. They heard how she thought she was signing a guest book, but she was actually signing away millions of dollars. They heard about the artwork he took off her walls. One particular painting, a masterpiece, was sold by Anthony. He took a commission on the sale. He charged his own mother a fee to sell her own property. That detail stuck with the jury. It was petty. It was desperate. Anthony's defense lawyers tried to paint a different picture. They said Brooke was lucid. They said she loved her son. They said she wanted him to have the money. They said the staff were liars. But the prosecution had the diaries. They had the dates. And they had the timeline of the changes to the will. Every time Brooke's mental state got worse, Anthony's share of the inheritance got bigger. That was not a coincidence. That was a strategy. The trial lasted for 5 months. The jury deliberated for days. The tension in the city was palpable. This was the final judgment on the Astor legacy. Was this family above the law? Or were they just common criminals in expensive suits? On the 8th of October, 2009, the jury returned. Anthony Marshall stood up. He was 85 years old. He had trouble hearing. He had trouble walking. The foreman read the verdict. Guilty. Guilty of grand larceny. Guilty of scheming to defraud. The son of the last great American dynasty was a convicted felon. The shock in the courtroom was absolute. You simply did not see men like Anthony Marshall go to prison. They settled out of court. They paid fines. They did not go to jail. But the Astors had run out of luck. The money that had protected them for 2 centuries could not protect them from this. The judge had harsh words. He said Anthony had committed a theft of opportunity. He sentenced the 5-year-old man to 1 to 3 years in state prison. Anthony appealed. He fought the sentence for years. He claimed he was too sick to go to jail. He claimed he would die there. But in June 2013, at the age of 89, Anthony Marshall surrendered. He arrived at the prison in a wheelchair. He was processed like any other inmate. He was given a number. He was given a uniform. The man who had grown up in palaces, who had played on the lawns of the greatest estates in America, was now locked in a cell. He served only 8 weeks before he was granted medical parole. He died a year later, but the damage was done. The reputation of the family was shattered. The good Astors were gone. The bad Astors were gone. All that was left was a tragedy. So, where does that leave us? Look at the timeline. John Jacob Astor I arrived in America in 1783 with nothing. He built the greatest fortune the country had ever seen. He dreamed of a dynasty that would last 1,000 years. It took exactly 230 years for it to completely implode. The money is mostly gone. Anthony's greed ensured that the estate was eaten up by lawyers and taxes. The millions he tried to steal were spent defending him in court. The great mansions on Fifth Avenue? They belong to hedge fund managers and foreign oligarchs now. The Beechwood estate in Newport? Sold. The land in Manhattan? Sold. Parcel by parcel, over the generations. The name Astor is everywhere in New York. Astor Place, the Waldorf Astoria, the Astor Library. But the family? They are ghosts. There are descendants, of course. They live quiet lives. They work normal jobs. They do not rule society. They do not own the city. The curse has finally been broken, because the money that fueled the curse has evaporated. And perhaps that is the only happy ending possible. When you look back at the entire saga, from the butcher of Baden swindling fur trappers in the wilderness, to the slumlord squeezing rent from the poor, to the ballroom wars, to the freezing waters of the Atlantic, to the soiled couch on Park Avenue, you see one pattern: isolation. The money did not connect them to the world. It separated them from it. John Jacob Astor, I died alone, feared by everyone. William Backhouse Astor was a slave to his ledger books. John Jacob Astor IV died alone on a sinking ship, separated from his pregnant wife. Vincent Astor died childless and cold. And Anthony Marshall died a convicted felon, hated by a city his mother loved. Only Brooke Astor escaped the curse. And she did it by doing the one thing no other Astor had ever dared to do. She gave it away. She found joy not in hoarding the gold, but in releasing it. She understood the secret that the first John Jacob never learned. Money is like manure. Pile it up, and it stinks. Spread it around, and things grow. Today, if you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you can sit in the Astor Court. It is a beautiful, quiet Chinese garden. It is peaceful. It is a sanctuary in the middle of a chaotic city. Sit there for a moment. Listen to the water. Look at the stone. And remember the cost of it all. Remember the fur trade. Remember the slums. Remember the Titanic. Remember the betrayal. The story of the Astors is the story of America. It is the story of ambition, of brilliance, and of a hunger that can never be satisfied. We look at billionaires today. We watch their rockets launch. We track their net worth. We envy their freedom. But if the ghosts of the Astors could speak, they would tell you a different truth. They would tell you that the climb is thrilling. The view from the top is breathtaking. But the fall is inevitable. And it is a long, long way down.